If you're a fan of mixed martial arts, you already know about Ariel Helwani. He's the leading journalist, the leading reporter, the leading insider covering the UFC and all of MMA and all its other incarnations. Even if you're not a fan of MMA, though, you really should know him, or at least know his story. He's a kid from Montreal, maybe not a kid, he's a kid to me, but a kid from Montreal who carved out a career reporting about a sport that was in its infancy, that was being born as he was covering it. Dana White is the all-powerful head of that company. They treat the media in a lot of ways differently than other sports do, almost as an extension of the company. And if they don't like you, they can make you go away. They can squeeze you out. They can prevent you from doing your job. Ariel Helwani has managed to straddle that line, to cover the sport honestly and bravely, to raise the hackles of the people who run it at times, and to still be a really courageous and really first-rate journalist. He's also one of my favorite guys to talk to. Never mind just in the journalistic world. One of my favorite guys to talk to, period.
It's great to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Hey, welcome.
What a great honor this is.
It's a pleasure.
Why can't I be the greatest, right? The face of sports television. Why can't I be that guy?
Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is an honor for me.
Well, this is great fun for me. As you know, I'm a big fan, and we are in the fight town, the fight capital of the world.
That's right.
Whatever kind of fight we're talking about in Las Vegas. I've been coming here. I got to tell you, the first time I came here was 1985, I think.
Wow.
Home Spinks won.
Wow.
In the parking lot of the Riviera, just up the road here.
Wow.
It didn't look like this. Like none of this stuff was here. It was much smaller, but it was still, man, it was a thrill for me that first time. How did you? Well, let's start. I want to do a little bit of the biographical stuff with you, Ariel. Like, how does a nice Jewish boy from Montreal end up hanging with people in affliction T-shirts and cauliflower ears? Like,
it's a crazy thing how it's all ended up this way. I was always, and by the way, this is like, if you would have told me 10 years ago, I'd be sitting with the great Stephen Brunt.
Stop it.
In Las Vegas. This is amazing. Because I am a Canadian sports fan. I looked up to people like you and Jeff Blair and all the greats. So. I always looked up to the broadcasters, to the journalists. I was always fascinated by the media side of things. When I would watch sports on television, I would try to emulate the broadcasters, how they spoke, how they introduced, the telecast, things like that, more so than the athletes themselves. And so this was always something that was fascinating to me, but I never really thought that it could be a job because it just seemed like such a distant thing, right? And so I remember vividly being in the 9th grade and reading Sports Illustrated, and it was an issue where they were talking about the best schools in America for X, Y, and Z. And I remember a little blurb in the magazine saying that Syracuse University was the best school for sports journalism.
A lot of great sports broadcasters have come out of
Bob
it, right?
Costas, Marv Albert. I remember those two names in particular being listed, and I loved those guys because I was a big NBA fan when I grew up. I grew up in Montreal. I didn't really love hockey. I loved the NBA for some weird reason. And this before the Raptors even, and the explosion of basketball in Canada. And so in my mind, I said, all right, I'm going to go to Syracuse University. And that was the goal. And when I finally got to Syracuse University for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people with the same dream and goal that I had. And that was different. That had never happened before. I was growing up with kids in Montreal. The Jewish community is very secluded. Everyone wants to be, the typical doctor, lawyer, etc. And I want to be a sports broadcaster. And to my parents' credit, they never questioned me.
I was going to ask you. I say, okay, what a mom and dad think.
Couldn't have been bigger fans. Couldn't have been bigger supporters. And I remember vividly getting to Syracuse and telling them, everyone kind of wants to be the same thing here, and I don't want to be like everyone else. But there's this sport called mixed martial arts that at the time was 8 years old. That I think is going to be mainstream, and I think in 10 years there's going to be some guy in some office who says, I know nothing about this sport, but we need to start paying attention to it. Who's the guy? Find me the guy. And I want to be the Howard Cosell of MMA. That's what I told them. And they said, go for it. And so I started my own radio show at Syracuse, and I really started to focus on mixed martial arts. And just to tell you how big of a supporter my mom was, the radio station that I did the show at, Saturday mornings, 8 a.m. No one's up at 8 a.m. in college, right?
Yeah.
That was my show. The phone that we had there only made outgoing calls, so I would book guests on the show. My mom or my 11-year-old sister at the time would call the guests and then call me on conference, pretend to be my producer and call me on conference, and that's how I would have guests on my show.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. This sport, so you came in, you said it was 8 years old. I'm trying to think where that would have been in the I don't want to measure it just in UFC terms, but it's tempting to do that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
they number everything.
Yeah.
They weren't the whole sport. They aren't the whole sport. They're just most of it. So where was that in terms of their evolution?
Oh my gosh. So this is when they're pretty much off pay-per-view. But when I started to really get invested in it in college, this was the rise of Tito Ortiz and the rise of Chuck Liddell. And so it was around early, like UFC 30s or so.
Okay, yeah. Like I gotta say, like I was at UFC 7, weirdly enough, in Buffalo. But not by it, just sort of as a lark.
To cover it?
No, well, I was, yeah, sort of. I was there with some TV guys and some media guys, and we just went down for the heck of it, right?
Okay.
Because what was this thing?
Yeah.
And I remember, I got to tell you honestly, like that night, kind of looking around the crowd and kind of watching it play out, I kind of thought this is the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
This is the end of civilization as
Yeah.
we know it. I have come around in a lot of ways, and the sport has come around.
Absolutely. You know, when I was a fan, so when I graduated, I actually went into TV production. I worked at HBO Sports, I worked on a show for ESPN Classic, but I still really kept tabs on the sport itself. And I felt as a fan that the sport wasn't being covered professionally or the way I wanted it to be covered as a fan compared to other sports. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine thinking, like, there's no real great video coverage of this sport. It's all guys with camcorders doing their thing. And not to hate on them, they were just doing what they could, but I felt like it could be taken up a notch. So my idea was, what if I show up to events with a mic flag, with a microphone, wearing, you know, a jacket, a tie, things like that on fight night, and just kind of dress it up a little bit. And I felt like there was an opening there. But when I got to Spike TV, it felt very early on that it wasn't the place for me and that they didn't really do anything creative. It wasn't really a place where you can actually flex your creative muscles. So I quit after a week. And my boss told me, this is the biggest mistake of your life. You're going to regret this. This is such a huge error on your part, unprofessional. And I just said, I don't feel like this is the place for me. I felt it was the crossroads of my life. So they made me stick around for a month until they found someone to replace me. I was literally there for a week. Started a new job, ended it a week later. And it was there that I started my own website. I called it jerrypark.com in honor of the Expos. Why did I call it Jerry Park? Because I couldn't think of a name. I couldn't think of a good URL. And I gave myself 6 months from October of 2007 to April 1st, 2008. If I don't get a job off of this, I'll go back to TV production. Luckily, with 3 days left on my deadline, someone called me starting a website. They gave me a job, and they had a video platform behind them. I said, great. My goal, my dream is to do video interviews for mixed martial arts. They said, go for it. And that's when I started showing up to events with the mic flag, with the suit and everything. But for the first 2 years of my career, the UFC wouldn't credential me. They said that we didn't have the site, the backing, whatever the clout to be allowed at their events. So I'm forever grateful to the Strike Forces, to the Elite XCs, to the IFLs, to the Afflictions, these other promotions that let me in, because if it wasn't for them, I never would have been able to make a name for myself. And it was really just posting these interviews on YouTube. And so I grew up in front of the fans on the internet. I didn't go the traditional route of being on TV first.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, could you make a living?
Early on, it was. So you want to know what's funny? When I left Spike, I could say now, I was making around $35,000. That was my salary. And when this new website reached out to me, MMArated.com, backed by the Wasserman Media Group, they asked me, how much do you want to get paid? And I was like, all right, let me see if I can actually cash in here. And I doubled it. I said 70, and they said yes. And so for those 6 months, I did not get paid anything. I was just on my own doing the website, and they said yes. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this actually worked. Now, much to my dismay, 6 months later, Wasserman sold the site to another company, and they shut down the website. And so once again, I had tasted the dream, and it was taken away from me. And it actually took me several months to get back in, which was a very scary time because I thought like I was onto something, and it was taken away. But luckily, I got another job, and that's when I kind of resumed everything.
You told me to say hello to you the next time we meet each other in person. I'll give you a keyword, all right? The Little Mermaid. Made fun of my name. You called me the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, the Little Mermaid. You look like, you don't look like the Little Mermaid, because she was beautiful. You ugly as hell.
Now you'll never forget the mermaid. You'll never forget. Man, those are
now.
some hard punches, man. Damn.
I remember you now, Ariel. You cool, man. I remember you, man.
The other thing that's different about covering, so it starts out, as I say, kind of a DIY media universe, and there's no kind of progression, nor where you say, okay, I'm going to go cover high school sports, and I'm going to go cover college sports, and then I'm going to wind up covering the big leagues, right? To become a baseball writer, a football writer, a hockey writer, there's kind of a natural progression within. This wasn't like that because the sport was being invented at the time. But the other thing is, you're covering a company. Like it's not a monopoly per se, but there are competitors. You alluded to some of the past ones that are gone, their history, but this is dominated by one company.
Mm-hmm.
It's dominated in a lot of ways by one guy. Of course, now he had partners before who stayed in the shadows, the Fertittas. They didn't come out, weren't public very much. He has massive money backing him now, but this is one company. This is Dana White, one guy. That's different than covering the NHL or covering Major League Baseball or covering the National Football League or covering the NBA, where, yeah, you have a commissioner and you have a league, but there's a different set of rules.
Yeah.
Right? There's a different set of rules. Like, how do you cover a company when the company runs everything?
Well, those leagues and those teams are a lot more structured, right?
Yes.
So I like the circus-like atmosphere here. I enjoyed that. I thought that was the appeal to all of this. Like, wow, you have this guy who's the owner of this company, who swears, who kind of wears his emotions on his sleeve. Like, this is actually interesting to me, more so than the suit who just kind of talks in cliches and gives you the ho-hum answers. So I enjoyed that. I found that to be a challenge, and I'll be honest, I felt like there wasn't a lot of competition, right, from the media standpoint. And so I felt like I could come in and hopefully try to make a name for myself a little quicker than had I gone the NBA route, for example. But early on in my career, once they finally let me through the door and finally, credentialed me, because they didn't for the longest time, and I wasn't sure if they would ever credential me because I kept applying, and they kept turning me down.
But again, that's something that's something in another sport. Like, you can't.
Yeah.
There are rules for how you get credentialed, and they have to follow those rules, right?
Yes.
And there are writers' associations that would fight for you, and all of that stuff.
None of that.
None of that, right?
No. You want to know what's so funny? I was working for a company after MMA rated Versus, the television station, which now has become NBCSN, owned by Comcast. Versus aired UFC. They had a TV deal with the UFC. The UFC would air 4 events, and another promotion that they owned, Zuffa owned, called WEC, aired on Versus Television, and I was a writer for Versus.com. Once I got to Versus.com, I would apply to go to UFC events, and they would turn me down because they said my website wasn't big enough. But I'm like, I'm the broadcast partner. How is it? So then I started to take it personally, and I was like, is there something against me? And this is long before any issues that I had. Luckily, there was someone named Kevin Ioli who worked for Yahoo Sports who actually went to Dana White personally and said, there's this kid who has a journalism degree who went to Syracuse, who's actually taking this very seriously and is very professional about it all. You guys should really let him and to let him in. And to Dana's credit, he had no idea about any of this. It was the PR people. The PR team for the UFC back in the day, with all due respect, they just weren't the best and weren't very professional in my opinion. And for whatever reason, they had an axe to grind and they didn't want to let me in. But once he found out about that, I was in right away. And, now all of a sudden, all right, I made it to the big league, so to speak, league singular, because there's just one dominant brand, to your point. And, the head of it all couldn't be nicer to me. Was so accessible, so gracious, so nice, would give me as much time, good or bad, and it was just a great way. I mean, that was a huge point. 2009, 2010, when that kind of started, that was a huge turning point for my career, because that's when people really started to notice me.
Ariel Helwani for fanhouse.com, backstage at UFC 106 with UFC President Dana White. Dana, how are you?
Good. This guy's turned out to be one of the best interviewers in MMA, so I try to with him a little bit here and throw him off his game.
Got to ask you a little bit about your relationship with Dana. I don't want to get you in any more of a pickle than you've already been in, but it's been tricky, hasn't it? Again, we've talked, we alluded to it. He is all powerful. They make up the rules as they go along in terms of how they treat the media. You have been banned by him at times. That's different than if Roger Goodell didn't like you and you're covering the NFL. Roger Goodell's not going to throw you out of the stadium, probably. Where did that start, and how have you managed it?
Well, I do think anytime I'm asked about this, I do think it's very important to say that in the beginning of my career, he couldn't have been better to me. Again, if I don't speak to him ever again on camera, on the record, I will have still probably spent more time with him on camera than any other person in the sport. That's how gracious he was with his time. The beginning of the change of the relationship happened when Fox became the broadcast partner of the UFC, and at some point maybe I flew a little too close to the sun.
As a result of this and other decisions, is it fair for you to say that Keith Kaiser is doing your state
Nevada a disservice as commissioner, that he's not doing his job?
Ariel, shut up.
I've often thought about my decision to work for Fox because that made it a little too, I think, for lack of a better word, like incestuous, right? You know, it didn't feel like it was as independent as it once was, or at least I wasn't. And I was working for a website, an independent website, MMAfighting.com, but I was also working for Fox. And I think my position with Fox brought about expectations on the UFC side of things for me to be a certain way and report a certain way. But I still had another job here, and there was never any discussion about what I could say or not say, but I think there was an assumption on this side of things. I hope you're understanding what I'm trying to say.
No, because you're part of the team in that sense, right?
But there was never any discussion about, like, don't do this, do that. And I think over time, I was there for almost 5 years, they would get increasingly upset and annoyed about me talking about things like free agency, very benign things, the typical sports riffraff that you talk about on talk radio each and every day. But to them, again, you know, they don't want these things out there. And so, you know, March of 2016, they asked Fox to let me go, and Fox obliged. And that kind of really, that was the dissolving of the relationship. And then after that, of course, I was upset, and I have a family, and a job was just taken away, and a big job for me, an important job, a television job. There's not many television jobs in this sport, so the shackles had been taken off. So my approach was, I'm going to break every single story out there. And again, I'm not talking about like dark and dirty secrets. I'm talking about this guy fighting this guy. I was just on a mission.
It was the kind of stuff, and I say, like, it's the kind of stuff that is broken every day in every other sport by guys who report,
news.
You know, insider stuff, right?
Yes.
Like people live off that stuff in every sport. It wasn't. You weren't like scandal mongering.
No,
like,
I was not looking through their tax.
Not that wouldn't have been interesting.
Sure,
but sure, yeah.
Absolutely. But they didn't like that. You know, that just kind of, I guess, made things a little bit worse. And you know, it has never been. Unfortunately, I've tried to repair the relationship. I've reached out. I've done everything that I could, and at times I've had to swallow my pride, and I've had to say, you know, why am I the one reaching out? You know, they should be reaching out to me. I'm not the one who did anything wrong. I'm not the one who took someone's job away. But no one wants all of this. I don't want to be defined by this. I don't want this to be the label on my career, the top, you know, the lead of my story, so to speak. I've tried. No one wants it to go away more than I do, but there has not been a reciprocation, and to be honest, it hasn't really affected the way I could do my job now. Like, as long as I have the credentials, as long as I have the access to the fighters, as long as the fighters and the managers have respect for me, I can do the job. You know, if I don't speak to Dana, like, he has every right to say no. He doesn't have to speak to me anymore. That's fine. I just want to be able to do my job and go home to my family and be left alone. And so where it stands now is just like, it's just a non-relationship, so to speak, and that's okay as long as I can do my job. That's all I want to do.
Now you're at ESPN now.
Yeah.
They're at ESPN now.
Yeah.
Which, you know, and for both of you, that's, you know, pretty significant. Like, there are other sports networks, but, you know, the ESPN is still the go-to, and the definition of the mainstream in the United States. So for them, it's hugely significant that the ESPN has come in as a huge partner for them. And I would think for you professionally, a big deal getting ESPN, right?
This was the dream.
Yeah.
That was like the really like far away dream, right? And so to finally, after all these years and everything I've been through, June of 2018, to finally get to the worldwide leader, again, you know, Jewish kid from Montreal, it just doesn't really happen. There aren't many of us there, and so that was a very emotional time for me. It was a really big deal. And to be honest, when I agreed to go to ESPN, I had no idea that they were about to get in business with UFC. I just thought they wanted to beef up their coverage. That had never come up once in our conversation. And I signed my contract with ESPN first week of April 2018. Mid-May, following month of 2018, the news breaks that they've signed the UFC, and I was like, well, how did this happen? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this? And I'll be honest, I was wondering, is this a good thing for me or a bad thing?
I was just going to ask you that. Like, yeah, how do you feel? Let's say, man, the guys I work for made this huge commitment to the sport. Oh, wait, hang on a second.
Yeah.
They made this huge commitment. This is why they're partners with these guys now. You remember the Fox thing, right? Like,
right. Oh, I was like, I've seen this movie before.
Yes.
I just lived through this, you know, and I wasn't really all that eager to live through it again, if I'm being 100% honest. I hate to say it, but they've done everything that Fox didn't do.
Yeah.
And it has really meant a lot to me, and it's very emotional for me because, you know this as a father, like, at this point, I can't be selfish anymore. As much as it's great to be at these events in Vegas and cover this and the glitz and glamour, like, I need to feed my family. You know, like, this is not a game anymore to me. This is my life. You know, I'm a dad. I'm almost 40. So this idea of playing with fire and banned and credentials taken away and your job, like, this is too serious for me now. I can't mess this up. And so to have a company, to work for a company that will go to bat for me and will actually stick up for me when the going gets tough, really makes me at ease and very comfortable and happy. And so I'm really, like, people sometimes are like, oh, you're such an ESPN homer, or you're a company guy. I will proudly wear that badge. I am very proud to work at ESPN, and you know, I want everyone to know that.
Did they have to, do you know, did they have to, like, again, given the way the Fox thing went
Yeah.
down, did they have to stand up for you right away?
Yes.
They did?
Yes.
What else do you want to do?
I want to be considered why can't I be the greatest, right? Like, why can't I be the face of sports television? Why can't I be that guy? Why can't I be doing, you know, post-game interviews for the finals, the NBA finals? You know, why can't I be at the Super Bowl? Why not at this point? You know, why not me? So I don't want to take away anyone's job. I don't want to do that, and I want to be very respectful of everyone who's there and pay my dues. And if they want me to do X, Y, and Z, I will do it. But eventually, you got to shoot for the stars, right? You have to. I believe strongly that you only have one life. And if you're 80 years old and you're looking back and you say, what if, and I should have done this, or I could have done that, that to me would be a devastating thing. So I would love to do that. I adore interviewing people. If for the rest of my days I could just interview people, that would be great. You know, like a sort of sit down, very much what you're doing right now. I love this sort of thing.
Me too.
That I prefer being in your chair than in this chair, if you know what I'm saying. And so I just want to do that. I want to continue to live my dream. I want to be a good, you know, role model for my kids and my wife and support them. And I just want to show people that, like, hey, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter what country you're from. This is possible. Shoot for the stars.
You know, shoot for the stars, and and you know, man, I'll tell you, sky's the limit. You're really good. You're going to do all that stuff.
Coming from you, my favorite sports journalist, regardless of country, Stephen Brunt. Are you kidding me? This man right here, living legend. This is part of the dream, honestly. Like, to get recognition from people like you. You know, I watch you guys on TV. You know, and it's I don't know who I like.
Well, I'll tell you
something. I have to thank for all this.
The last thing I'll say is,
Okay.
as an old newspaper guy,
Yeah.
you know, and a journalist, as a reporter, you know, which is where it's not everything I do is reporting now, but that's where I come from. I admire the guts that you show as a reporter.
Thank you.
Know, like you're a really good broadcaster, and you can do any of this stuff, but it takes some stones to do what you do. So
Thank you.
You know, it is, and you face stuff that I haven't faced. So good for you, man. And I say, I think you'll do all of those things and more. It is.
Thank you. That means a lot
pleasure.
to me, the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.